What was your we need to leave now moment? Story 1. In 2019, I took my girlfriend on a weekend getaway to a remote mountain cabin listed on Airbnb. It was supposed to be peaceful. No cell signal, no Wi-Fi, just us and nature. First night was perfect. The second night? Total shift in tone. Around midnight, we heard loud, crunching footsteps outside the window. We figured it was a deer until the footsteps stopped right behind the cabin and just stayed there. No movement. No sound. I whispered to her that it was probably an animal, but she pointed out there were boot prints in the mud when we arrived. Then we noticed something worse. Our host had forgotten to mention the broken lock on the back door. I had propped a chair under the knob earlier just in case. As we sat there in total silence, the doorknob jiggled slightly, once, then again. I mouthed, "Get the keys." We grabbed our backpacks, shoes in hand, and slowly crept to the car. The moment I turned on the headlights, I saw a man in a hoodie standing near the tree line, maybe 30 feet away, watching us. I didn't even put on my seatbelt. We left everything behind, reported it to the host and the police. Never got any answers. Story 2. When I was 10, my mom and I went to a yard sale in our neighborhood. It was held at this run-down house at the end of a cul-de-sac. Nothing weird at first, just old furniture, books, the usual. Then I wandered around the side of the house and peeked in an open window. Inside, I saw a man duct-taped to a chair. He looked terrified. I blinked, looked again, and he was still there, eyes wide, mouth gagged. I ran to my mom and told her what I saw. She didn't believe me at first, but when I insisted, she walked over and looked too. She turned pale instantly, grabbed my hand and whispered, "Don't run. Walk to the car." Now, we drove straight to the nearest police station. Later, we found out the house had been used by a guy with a criminal record who was holding a debt collector hostage. They arrested him that day. That was my first taste of real danger and how quickly normal can flip to horrifying. Story 3. During a spring break trip to New Orleans, my friends and I ended up at a sketchy bar off Bourbon Street. It was crowded, loud, and honestly not our scene, but we were trying to be spontaneous. I went to the bathroom, and on my way back, I passed a hallway with a red light where I saw two guys dragging an unconscious woman through a door. I froze. One of them looked right at me. We locked eyes for a second, and he just smiled. I walked back to my friends and told them we needed to leave. Now, one of them argued that I was overreacting. I grabbed her wrist and said, "We are leaving. No questions." The bouncer at the front gave us a weird look as we left, like he knew. I called the police from our hotel room. Never found out what happened to the girl. I still think about her sometimes. I hope she made it out. Story 4. My husband and I were hiking in Oregon last summer. We got off trail a bit after following what looked like a shortcut. About an hour in, we stumbled across a campsite, except it didn't look like a typical one. There were dozens of plastic dolls tied to trees with red string. Some had their eyes burned out. The fire pit was full of animal bones. A hunting knife was stabbed into a stump, and nearby was a pile of clothes. Kids' clothes. No one was around, but we both had this overwhelming sense of being watched, like that buzzing in your brain when your instincts are screaming. We didn't talk. We just turned around and booked it back to the trail. We didn't stop until we were in the car, locked in, panting. I reported it to a ranger the next day. He said, "Yeah, we've heard about that site, but every time we check, it's empty. Nope. Never hiking off trail again." Story 5. Back in college, I went to a house party with my roommate. Normal stuff. Beer pong, loud music, strangers everywhere. But this one guy kept trying to talk to me. He wasn't aggressive. Just off. He asked me really personal questions within minutes of meeting, like where I lived, what nights I worked, whether I walked alone. I brushed him off, but he kept finding me in the crowd. At one point, I was in the kitchen and saw him looking through my purse. He tried to pretend he was just moving it, but I knew what I saw. I grabbed my roommate and said we had to go. She resisted until I whispered what happened. As we were leaving, I looked back. He was standing on the porch, watching us with the creepiest grin. 2 days later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Why'd you leave so early?" He had taken my number from my phone. Police didn't do much. I changed my number, moved out a month later. I still double-check that my purse is zipped at parties. Story 6. A few years back, my cousin invited me to a poker night at this guy's apartment. I didn't know anyone, but figured it would be fun. At first, it was chill. Beer, chips, small bets. But then, this one guy, who looked ex-military and way too intense for friendly games, started losing hard. Like hundreds of dollars. You could see his eye twitching. Eventually, he accused another player of cheating. Things escalated fast. The guy reached under the couch and pulled out a gun. Everyone froze. No one said a word. The guy he accused had his hands up. The air was thick with panic. Then the gun guy said, dead serious, "I've been to prison. I ain't afraid of going back." That was enough for me. I stood up slowly and said, "Bathroom." I texted my cousin from the hallway. "I'm leaving now." He followed a minute later. We didn't even say goodbye. I could hear shouting as we jogged to my car. He never spoke to that crowd again. Story 7. In high school, my friend Olivia invited me to a sleepover with a few other girls. Her older brother had recently come back from college and was acting off. He'd stare too long, linger in the doorway, make inappropriate jokes. I was uncomfortable, but no one else seemed fazed. Around midnight, we were watching a movie when the power went out. Olivia's mom wasn't home that weekend. We all assumed it was a fuse. I volunteered to go check. When I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something strange. The front door was wide open. The power box wasn't touched. Then I saw her brother, crouched behind the couch, holding a camera. He didn't see me. I backed away, grabbed my stuff, and whispered to the other girls, "We have to go, now." They followed me without question. I called my mom from the car, shaking. Later, I found out he had been suspended from college for stalking. Story 8. I used to work night shifts at a gas station in rural Kentucky. One night, around 3 a.m., a beat-up pickup truck pulled in with no headlights. The guy inside didn't get gas, didn't buy anything. He just sat there, staring through the window. I got that primal fear feeling in my chest. I watched him from behind the counter for 15 minutes. Then he pulled out a duffel bag from his back seat. I couldn't see what was inside, but he opened it slowly and looked around. That was enough for me. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and called the sheriff's office. Before they arrived, the guy slowly drove off, still with no headlights. Turns out, they found rope, duct tape, a ski mask, and 2 knives in the trash next to the station the next morning. To this day, I'm convinced I was next on his list. Story 9. We rented a cheap Airbnb in Mexico during a backpacking trip. It was a weird little house in a quiet village, but the price was unbeatable. First night was fine. Second night? Absolutely terrifying. We started hearing this mechanical humming sound from under the floorboards, then a muffled bang. I figured it was plumbing, but when we checked the bathroom, the toilet was full of dark red liquid. Like really red. No smell. Just thick. Later, we noticed there were cameras mounted inside the bedroom smoke detectors. Real lenses, not fake. That was it. I didn't care if we lost money. We packed and ran in the middle of the night. Reported the place to Airbnb. They removed the listing. Still don't know what was under that house. Story 10. A few years ago, I was at a concert with my younger brother. We were standing near the front row. Everything was going great, until I noticed a guy nearby wearing a massive trench coat, despite the venue being boiling hot. He wasn't dancing, moving, or reacting to anything, just staring dead ahead, both hands deep in his coat pockets. Then I saw him mouth something to himself over and over. That's when the adrenaline kicked in. I told my brother we were going to get drinks, but once we got to the side entrance, I pulled him outside and said, "We're leaving." He was annoyed until we heard screaming 10 minutes later. Security had tackled the guy. He had knives taped inside the coat. Police said he had a notebook full of disturbing writing. We never go to concerts without checking exits now. Story 11. My dad used to take me fishing when I was a kid. And one time he brought me to this hidden lake way out in the woods. It was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects, not even wind. We were the only ones there, or so we thought. About an hour in, I noticed a figure standing on the opposite bank, barely visible between the trees. I pointed it out to my dad, but when he looked, the figure was gone. 5 minutes later, we found a fresh cigarette butt next to our tackle box. Neither of us smokes. Dad didn't say a word. He packed everything up in record time and whispered, "We're leaving. Don't ask questions." As we were walking back to the truck, I looked over my shoulder and saw a man crouched in the brush maybe 20 yards behind us. He wasn't following, but he was watching. Never went back. Dad never took me to that spot again. I think he knew more than he let on. Story 12. Back in 2013, I was couch surfing across Europe. In Romania, a host offered me a room in this ancient-looking farmhouse. He seemed eccentric but harmless, until nighttime. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to him standing silently at the foot of my bed. No light, just his silhouette. I asked what he was doing, and he said in a soft voice, "Just watching how you sleep. You breathe very quietly." I laughed nervously and told him to leave. He did. But when I went to lock the door, I found out it had no lock. I stuffed a chair under the knob and stayed up all night. At sunrise, I packed my things, and he was waiting in the kitchen, smiling like nothing happened. Offered me coffee. I said no thanks and started walking with my pack. As I left, he called out, "Most guests stay longer." Nope, never again. I booked a hostel for the rest of the trip. Story 13. My partner and I went to a psychic as a joke while on vacation in Salem. We didn't believe in any of it, just thought it'd be funny. The woman who did our reading was in her late 70s, soft-spoken and very calm, until she got to me. She looked at my palm, blinked hard, and said, "You brought something dark with you." I laughed, thinking it was part of the act, but she grabbed my hand tightly and said, "You need to leave. Now, leave town. Before night." Her tone was so serious it chilled me. I asked why, and she said, "It followed you here. If you stay, it stays." That night in our hotel, we heard tapping on the window. On the 6th floor. I checked. No ledge, no trees, nothing. Just tapping. We cut the trip short and left the next morning. I don't mess with that kind of stuff anymore. Story 14. I was at a family reunion BBQ out in a big rented park space. At one point, my 6-year-old nephew went missing for about 10 minutes. Everyone started panicking and calling his name. Eventually, someone found him behind a utility shed, talking to an old man in a park ranger uniform. The weird thing, there were no rangers assigned to the property. It was private land. When we approached, the man immediately walked off without a word. My nephew said he'd been telling him about a special cave and asking if he wanted to see where the deer sleep. I grabbed my sister and said, "We're done. We're leaving." Now, a week later, police reviewed surveillance footage from a nearby trail cam. The man wasn't wearing an official uniform. They circulated a sketch. Apparently, he'd been seen at multiple parks in the area talking to kids. No one ever caught him. Story 15. A few years ago, I was on a second date with a guy I'd met on a dating app. He seemed nice enough, polite, well-dressed. We went to dinner, and then he invited me to his place to watch a movie. His apartment was spotless, too spotless. No photos, no books, nothing personal. Just white walls and a couch. He offered me wine, but when I asked for the bottle to see what it was, he got weird, defensive. Said it was just wine. I pretended to take a sip. A few minutes later, I pretended to get a phone call and stood up to leave. He suddenly blocked the door, smiled, and said, "You sure you want to go? You just got here." Something in his tone flipped a switch in my brain. I smiled and said, "Actually, my brother's waiting outside." Total lie. His smile disappeared. I walked out, called an Uber 3 blocks away, reported him on the app. A week later, the profile was deleted. I'll never forget how fast his friendly act dropped when he thought I was trapped. Story 16. I used to babysit for a family that lived on the edge of a small forest preserve. The house was modern and nice, but the backyard opened directly into thick woods. One night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone when I heard the doorbell ring. No knock, just one ring. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole and saw a man in a hoodie, standing perfectly still, looking straight at the doorbell camera without blinking. Not moving, just waiting. I didn't answer. I texted the parents to ask if they knew someone who might stop by. No reply. Then I checked the side yard cameras and saw two more men. One crouched near the fence, another by the garage. None of them moved. They were just waiting. I called the cops immediately, locked everything, and kept the kids upstairs. By the time police arrived, the men were gone. But they left behind boot prints leading from the woods to the house, and one greasy handprint on the back window. I told the parents when they got home. They installed floodlights and moved 6 months later. Story 17. My friend and I went urban exploring in an abandoned hospital set to be demolished. Typical young and dumb adventure. It was broad daylight, and we slipped through a gap in the fence. The place was silent and decaying. Broken beds, empty IV bags, graffiti everywhere. Then we found the basement stairs. Of course we went down. It smelled awful. Mold, rust, and something else. Like old meat. As we turned the corner, we found a room that had clearly been used recently. Candles, animal bones, a circle drawn in chalk, and then a fresh blanket and unopened water bottles in the corner. Someone was living there. We froze when we heard something scrape against the floor in the room next door. Neither of us spoke. We turned around and ran. I dropped my flashlight, didn't even stop to grab it. At the fence we heard shouting behind us, not English. Deep voice, fast and angry. Never went back. That place wasn't just haunted, it was occupied. Story 18. In 2021, my husband and I stayed at a tiny roadside motel during a road trip through Arizona. It was late. We were exhausted, and it was the only place for miles. We checked in, went to our room, and immediately noticed something strange. The mirror was positioned directly facing the bed, with a small red light in the upper corner. My husband thought it was a smoke detector. I didn't. I got on a chair and took a closer look. It wasn't a detector. It was a tiny camera lens poking through the frame of the mirror. I yanked the mirror off the wall and found not just a camera but a small viewing station behind the wall. Wires, power strip. Hetonda. I grabbed our stuff and we went straight to the front desk. No one was there. The lights were on, but the office was empty. We left everything else and drove through the night to the next town. I called the police the next day. They were already investigating the place for multiple reports. The motel has since been shut down. Story 19. Back in college, I volunteered at a community center in a rough part of town. One evening, as we were cleaning up, a kid, probably 8 years old, ran inside crying and screaming, "He's coming! He's coming!" We calmed him down enough to ask who he meant. He just kept saying, "The Bone Man," and pointed out the window. I thought he was making up a story, until I saw someone walk past the gate, tall, thin, wearing a homemade mask made of animal bones, just walking slow, dragging something metal along the ground. Everyone went silent. The center director, who was ex-military, immediately said, "Lock the doors. Get the kids downstairs." I helped herd them into the basement. We waited there for 40 minutes in the dark, trying not to breathe too loud. No one ever tried the door. No banging, no talking. Just silence. When we came back up, there was a pile of bones in front of the gate. Like an offering. Cops never caught him. Story 20. My girlfriend and I were hiking in Utah when we got caught in a surprise rainstorm. We ducked into what looked like an abandoned mine entrance for shelter. It was shallow and dry. Seemed safe enough to wait it out. After maybe 15 minutes, I heard voices deeper inside the tunnel. Not yelling, whispers. Murmuring, like chanting. I looked at my girlfriend and whispered, "Do you hear that?" Then we saw the faint flicker of firelight coming from farther in. We quietly stood up to leave, but before we even took 2 steps, a shadow crossed the tunnel wall. Then another. Multiple people, holding what looked like sticks or staffs, moving toward the entrance. We bolted. Didn't look back. Slid half the way down a muddy hill, soaked and shaking. Back at the ranger station, we mentioned what we saw. The ranger looked annoyed and said, "I've told those freaks to stop doing rituals out there. I'll file another warning." Another warning? How many times had they done this? We don't hike off trail anymore. Story 21. In 2015, I took a job photographing weddings. One gig brought me to a massive rural estate outside a tiny town in Tennessee. It was picturesque, but isolated. No cell reception, winding dirt road, middle of nowhere. After the ceremony, I stepped outside to get shots of the reception tent from a distance. That's when I saw something strange in the tree line. A woman in a dirty wedding dress, barefoot, standing still. Her face was pale and smeared with makeup. At first, I thought she was part of the wedding. Maybe a joke or performance. But she wasn't smiling. She pointed directly at me. Didn't move. Just pointed. I called out, thinking it was a prank. She didn't respond. I blinked, and she was gone. A few minutes later, I told the groom's brother, who happened to be one of the organizers. He turned pale. "Again?" he muttered. Then louder. "You didn't talk to her, right?" We packed up and left early. I was never told who or what I saw, but I never took another job that far off grid. Story 22. When I was in 8th grade, I went to a sleepover at a classmate's house. Around 2 a.m., she dared us to do Bloody Mary in her bathroom. Stupid middle school stuff. We did the chant, flickered the lights. Nothing happened. We laughed and went back to watching movies. Then the power went out. A few seconds later, we heard knocking from inside the bathroom. Not on the door, from inside the room. The light in there flicked on for a second, then off again. One girl screamed and ran. I wasn't far behind. My friend's parents said the wiring in the house was old, and we probably scared ourselves. I tried to sleep, but around 4 a.m., I woke up and saw the bathroom door slowly creaking open on its own. I got up and left the house. Walked 2 miles to my place barefoot. I still have no clue what it was. Could have been a prank, maybe even a coincidence. But something felt wrong in that house. Story 23. In my early 20s, I went on a Tinder date with a guy who seemed super sweet and charming. He offered to cook dinner at his place. Dumb, I know, but I went. The house was spotless. Almost too clean. No personal items, no clutter, not even dish soap by the sink. It felt like a display home. As he was cooking, he asked me strange questions. "Have you told anyone where you are tonight?" And, "Do you like disappearing sometimes?" Huge red flags. I laughed nervously and said I had friends tracking my location. He went quiet for a long time after that. While he was distracted, I texted my best friend my location and a code word we'd agreed on years ago. She called immediately and pretended she was outside. I told him I had to go let her in. He got agitated, saying we hadn't even eaten yet. I didn't care. I left and didn't look back. Later, I searched his name. Nothing came up. The number disconnected 2 days later. Story 24. A few years ago, my family rented a small lakeside cabin in Wisconsin for a weekend getaway. Everything was great the first day. Bonfires, fishing, swimming. That night, I took a walk by the lake alone to clear my head. I noticed strange, evenly spaced holes in the sand, all in a line leading into the woods. At the edge of the trees, I saw a man crouched low, holding what looked like a long stick. He wasn't moving. I backed away slowly, trying not to make noise. The next morning, the same holes had reappeared, this time circling the cabin. None of us had been outside. I told my dad, and he dismissed it as animal tracks. But then we found twine tied low around trees, tripwires, and sharpened sticks planted in the dirt like primitive traps. We packed that morning and left, filed a report with the ranger station. They told us, "Yeah, we've had issues in that area. We've been trying to catch him for months." Story 25. I was visiting my cousin in Detroit, and one night we decided to stop at a 24-hour diner. It was nearly empty, except for a few regulars and a guy sitting alone in the corner, scribbling something in a notebook and muttering. We ordered, and while waiting for our food, I went to use the bathroom. On the way back, I passed the guy's table and accidentally caught a glimpse of what he was writing. It wasn't words. It was pages and pages of names and dates. My cousin's name was on the list, and mine, spelled correctly, first and last. I stopped cold. My stomach dropped. He noticed me looking and slowly closed the notebook, gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I walked straight to my cousin and whispered, "We're leaving. I'll explain in the car." We got out fast, never went back. I still wonder how he knew our names and what the dates meant. Story 26. I used to work night shifts at a 24/7 laundromat in a sketchy part of town. Most nights were uneventful. A few regulars, a few weirdos, nothing major. But one night around 3 a.m., this guy walks in wearing an oversized coat and dragging a duffel bag behind him. He didn't put in any laundry. Just sat in the corner and stared. I ignored him at first, until I noticed something leaking from his bag. Thick, reddish-brown fluid. I asked if he needed help, and he muttered, "Not yet." I called the manager and told him I felt unsafe. As I was on the phone, the guy got up and started unloading the bag. I swear to God, it looked like a giant slab of meat, wrapped in black plastic and duct tape. That was enough. I grabbed the keys, walked out, locked the door, and called the police from across the street. Turns out it wasn't human. It was a butchered deer carcass. Still, why the hell would someone bring that to a laundromat at 3 a.m. and just sit there with it? No idea. But that night taught me to trust my instincts. Story 27. When I was younger, I volunteered on a humanitarian trip to rural South America. The village was peaceful and beautiful, until one night, everything changed. A group of men showed up in trucks, yelling in a language I didn't understand. They had weapons and were demanding something. The local guide herded us into a hut and whispered, "Do not speak. Do not move." We hid behind crates while men stomped through the house, flipping tables and searching for something. One guy came so close I could smell his sweat. I had never felt fear like that in my life. After what felt like hours, they left. Just drove off, like it was nothing. The guide turned to us and said, "We leave now." No argument. We packed only what we could carry and left the village under moonlight. Turns out, the group was a local militia that extorted villages. We had arrived on a collection week. I never went back. Still love the people. But I learned how quickly peace can turn to chaos. Story 28. My sister and I used to go geocaching, sort of like real-world treasure hunting using GPS. One summer, we decided to find a remote cache in the middle of nowhere near an abandoned railway tunnel. After an hour of hiking, we found the tunnel entrance. It was pitch black inside, but we had headlamps. The cache was supposed to be halfway through, near an old maintenance alcove. As we got deeper, we noticed fresh footprints in the dust. Not ours. And not just one pair, dozens. Like a crowd had recently walked through. We reached the alcove and found the cache, but as we opened it, we heard a loud metallic clang echo from the far end of the tunnel, followed by laughter. Not friendly laughter, choppy, raspy, and way too close. We didn't hesitate. Ran the full way back, nearly tripping over the old tracks. Later, we checked the logbook online. Someone had left a note the week before. Found it. But didn't like the others in the tunnel. Nope. Story 29. A couple of years ago, I rented an art studio in a cheap warehouse downtown. Most tenants were photographers or painters, and the building was mostly quiet, except the third floor, which was always locked. One night I stayed late working on a project and heard footsteps above me, even though I was on the top floor. Not walking. Running, back and forth, over and over. Curious, I went to the hallway and noticed the door to the third floor was open. I had never seen it open before, being the idiot I am. I went up. At the top of the stairs was a single hallway with doors on each side. No lights. As I stepped in, every door on the left side slammed shut, one after another. Then the hallway light flickered on, and I saw someone crawling into one of the rooms on all fours. I turned and ran. I packed up my supplies and left the building within 5 minutes. Moved out the same week. Still don't know who was renting that floor, or if anyone actually was. Story 30. During a group camping trip in Colorado, one guy brought along his dog, a huge German shepherd named Max. Max was calm, trained, and didn't bark at anything. On the second night, around 1 a.m., Max bolted out of one of the tents, snarling like a maniac. He stood facing the tree line, growling low, hackles raised. Then he started backing up. That dog was afraid. We all got up, shining our flashlights toward the woods, but saw nothing, just darkness. Then Max let out this high-pitched yelp and ran behind the tents, tail between his legs. We looked again and saw something move. Not walk, glide, low to the ground, white, no sound. No one spoke. No one moved. One guy whispered, "We need to go." Now, we broke down camp in total silence and hiked back to the trailhead before sunrise. Still don't know what it was, but if a 90-pound trained dog says run, you run. Story 31. A few years ago, my wife and I stayed at a bed and breakfast in a quiet English village. The place was charming. Flower boxes, homemade scones, warm hosts. Except for one odd detail. The guest book in the lobby had several entries that had been blacked out with a Sharpie. I'm a naturally curious person. So when the owners were out tending the garden, I took a piece of paper and did a pencil rub on one of the entries. It read, "We heard her again. Scratching from inside the walls." Dated just 2 weeks before we arrived. That night, around 2 a.m., we heard faint scratching sounds from inside the wooden paneling. Then a soft whisper, like someone trying to speak through plaster. We froze. It didn't stop. My wife whispered, "We need to leave." We packed and snuck out before sunrise, walking 3 miles to the nearest train station. The hosts never followed up. I tried Googling the place again last year. It doesn't exist anymore. No listings, no address. I still wonder what they were covering up in that guest book. Story 32. I work in real estate and was showing an older rural home to a potential buyer. The house had been vacant for years, but structurally, it was sound. The woman I was with wanted to see the basement, so I led the way down the creaky wooden steps. At the bottom, I noticed a small hole in the concrete wall, about the size of a dinner plate. I shined my flashlight into it and saw an eye looking back. I screamed, dropped the flashlight, and scrambled upstairs. The woman ran after me asking what was wrong. I just said, "We're leaving." I called the police. Told them what I saw. They searched the crawl space behind the wall and found signs of recent occupancy. Food wrappers, a bucket, old clothes. Whoever was in there had been living behind the basement wall. I stopped taking solo appointments after that. Story 33. At a music festival in the desert, my friends and I wandered off to find a good spot to watch the sunrise. We stumbled across a group of people in all white, sitting in a perfect circle around a campfire. They weren't dancing or drinking like everyone else, just sitting, silently, staring at the flames. One of them turned and looked at us. He smiled and said, "The fire accepts new light. Would you like to join the giving?" I thought it was a weird art performance. I laughed and said no thanks. The man's smile didn't drop. "It's better if you don't walk away." That chilled me to my bones. My friend whispered, "Leave. Don't run. Just go." We walked back through the sand, hearts pounding. Behind us, we heard chanting, low and rhythmic. When we told a security guard, he said, "You met the desert folk, huh?" "Yeah. They show up every year. No one knows who invites them." Story 34. My family owns a small cabin in Maine that we mostly use in the summer. One year, we decided to visit in the off-season, late October. Cold, empty, eerily quiet. The first night, we noticed the motion lights outside kept flicking on. I assumed raccoons or deer. But the next morning, we found wet footprints leading up to the window, bare feet, human-sized, no shoes, and no tire tracks or other footprints near the cabin. We checked the entire property. Nothing. So we stayed one more night just to prove we weren't paranoid. At 3:30 a.m., the power cut out. Then came a single knock on the front door. Not a bang, just one quiet, deliberate knock. I didn't check who it was. I didn't want to know. We packed in the dark and left before sunrise. Never went back in the fall again. Story 35. I once worked for a traveling carnival in my gap year, just selling tickets, nothing fancy. We moved every week, setting up in new towns. One night, I was walking to the staff trailer after closing when I heard whispering behind the funhouse. I peeked around the corner and saw a group of workers standing around someone tied to a chair. One guy had a wrench in his hand. The others were yelling in Spanish. It wasn't a joke or hazing. It looked serious. I backed away and made it to my bunk without being noticed. I barely slept. The next morning, the man and chair were gone. When I asked around, no one had seen anything. I quit that night and hitched a ride out of town with a vendor. When I contacted a former coworker months later, he said, "Smart move. Sometimes people don't make it to the next stop." I never told anyone else. Until now. Story 36. Back in high school, I volunteered to help with a local historical society's archive project. One day, they asked me to help sort through a collection of old letters and photos from a closed-down asylum that had operated in the early 1900s. The place was long abandoned, but they stored some materials in the old admin building, which still had power. I went with another volunteer, and we started sorting through boxes in a locked room. Midway through the afternoon, the hallway lights started flickering. Then we heard footsteps above us, even though the second floor was condemned and sealed. We paused, unsure. Then came the sound of dragging chains across the floor upstairs, followed by faint, breathy sobs. I looked at my partner and saw she was already packing up her bag. "I'm done," she said. "We need to go." Now, we left everything behind and bolted. Later, the society claimed it was pipes and creaky wood, but they couldn't explain how our locked storage room door was wide open the next morning. Story 37. During a road trip through Nevada, my friends and I ran out of gas on a remote stretch of highway. We were miles from the nearest town, so we started walking, hoping to flag someone down. Eventually, an old man in a beat-up pickup truck stopped and offered us a ride. He was quiet, barely spoke, just stared ahead as he drove. A few miles in, I noticed there were scratches on the inside of the passenger window, like someone had tried to claw their way out. Then I looked in the back seat. There was a length of rope, duct tape, and a crowbar. He noticed me looking and said, "Don't worry, that's for the coyotes." But his smile didn't reach his eyes. I mouthed to my friend in the back seat, "We need to jump." She nodded. At the next curve, we pretended to argue and asked him to pull over. As soon as he did, we bolted out and ran into the desert. He didn't follow. Just sat in the truck watching. To this day, I wonder if we made it out seconds before something much worse. Story 38. In college, I was part of a documentary class that filmed inside abandoned buildings. One night, we got permission to explore a decommissioned prison. Our professor had connections, and a security guard agreed to unlock the gate for a few hours. Everything was eerie but quiet. Cells, empty showers, cracked walls. We set up cameras and began filming interviews. At one point, I wandered off to get B-roll and ended up near solitary confinement. As I passed a cell, I heard whispering. I assumed it was my group, until I realized I was completely alone. I called out. No response. Then I heard the whisper again. Clearer. "Don't look back." I froze. My blood ran cold. Then a loud slam echoed behind me. I ran without checking what it was, caught up with the group, and said, "We're done." They didn't argue. We packed up and left early. Later, when we reviewed the footage, there was a shadow in the cell where I'd heard the voice, human-shaped. and we never saw it in real life. Story 39. I once stayed at a small motel during a job interview trip in Iowa. The receptionist was odd, overly polite but robotic, like she was reading a script. Whatever, I thought. It was cheap. That night I woke up to the sound of my doorknob turning. Slowly, deliberately. I froze, expecting it to stop. It didn't. Then a key slid into the lock. I jumped out of bed and yelled, "Who's there?" The turning stopped. Footsteps walked away slowly, without a word. I called the front desk. No answer. When I went down 20 minutes later, the front office was dark, empty. In the morning, I checked out and mentioned the incident. The woman at the desk said, "That's not possible. No one has a master key but me." I asked to check the log. She said there were no other guests checked in that night. I left without breakfast. Story 40. I used to take early morning walks through a local park before work. Quiet, peaceful, mostly empty. One foggy morning, I passed a bench and saw a man sitting there with a huge duffel bag. He was wearing old military fatigues and mumbling into a small tape recorder. As I walked by, I heard him say, "Test complete. Target acquired. Eliminate at 0700 hours." I thought maybe he was unstable, maybe just talking to himself. I picked up the pace. When I turned back, he was following me, calmly, at a steady pace. I cut through the trees and looped back to the parking lot, got in my car, locked the doors, and waited. He walked past my car, looked directly at me, and smiled, then kept walking, still recording. I never walked that park again. Later, I called the police to report the guy. They said others had seen him too, but every time someone goes to talk to him, he's gone. Story 41. When I was about 12, my family rented an RV and did a cross-country trip. One night, we stopped at a free overnight rest stop in the middle of Kansas. Just one other vehicle there, an old, rusted camper with no plates, sitting completely still with curtains drawn. We set up inside our RV and got ready for bed. Around midnight, I woke up to a soft tapping sound. I looked out the window and saw someone walking around our RV with a flashlight. Except it wasn't a park ranger or police officer. They were wearing a hoodie and moving slowly, shining the light into every window. I froze. He stopped by the main door and just stood there, listening. The scariest part, he wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. He wanted us to hear him. I whispered to my dad, who didn't say a word. He peeked through a curtain, grabbed the keys, and started the engine without turning on any lights. We drove off so fast I could hear gravel shooting from the tires. Never stayed in a free lot again. The next day, we heard that an RV had been broken into at that same stop. Story 42. My roommate and I once rented a super cheap apartment in a not-so-great part of town. The building was old and creaky, but we were broke college students, so we took it. The first night, we heard thumps and dragging sounds from the apartment above us. At 2 a.m., the landlord had said no one lived there yet. We brushed it off. Maybe someone was moving furniture in early. The next night, same thing, dragging, thumping, then a loud thud against our ceiling that made dust fall onto my bed. I went upstairs and knocked. No answer. But I noticed something. The door was slightly open. I pushed it a bit. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, just bare floors and this overwhelming stench of bleach. As I turned to leave, I saw a shadow move at the far end of the hallway. A human figure, tall, lanky, ducked into a room. I shut the door and ran. We moved out within 48 hours. Didn't care about the lease. Story 43. In my late teens, I was invited to a friend of a friend's bonfire in a wooded area outside town. We were told it was a spiritual gathering, candles, crystals, music. I thought it was hippie stuff. When we arrived, things seemed normal. Then a guy handed us robes and asked us to join the circle. They started chanting, like real chanting, in a language none of us knew. Then they passed around a bowl of some thick, dark liquid and encouraged us to drink. That's when I noticed one girl in the group shaking uncontrollably, eyes rolled back, barely conscious. I pulled my friend aside and said, "We're not drinking anything. Get your keys." He hesitated until one of the men asked, "Where do you think you're going?" We ran to the car, people yelling behind us. Someone actually tried to block the road, but we drove around them and peeled out. I never got a straight answer on what they gave that girl. We reported it. Police said the group was known to them, but didn't elaborate. Story 44. When my son was 4, we stopped at a roadside diner during a family road trip. It was one of those old-time places with outdated booths and the smell of frying oil soaked into the walls. While we were eating, an older man approached our table. He smiled at my son, leaned down, and said, "I remember you. You've grown since last time." We froze. My son looked confused. The man winked at him and walked away. I asked the waitress who he was. She said he was a regular. Came in every day, usually kept to himself. We paid the bill fast. As we walked to the car, the man was standing by a beat-up van in the parking lot. Back doors open. My husband didn't even wait to buckle the kid in. We locked the doors and drove. Fast. I still think about what would have happened if we'd looked away for even a second longer. Story 45. I worked briefly for a delivery service in a rural area. One day, I had to bring a package to a house at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by tall cornfields. No mailbox, just a wooden sign that said, "The Farm." I knocked. No answer. The front door was open a crack, so I called out just in case. That's when I heard the moaning. It wasn't pain. It sounded hypnotic, rhythmic, like someone in a trance. I stepped back and looked through the window. Inside, a group of people were standing in a circle around a fire pit built into the living room floor. They were chanting, eyes closed, rocking back and forth. One woman suddenly looked up, directly at me. She screamed. Not a scared scream, a call. The others turned. I dropped the package on the porch and ran to the truck. As I drove away, I saw 3 of them standing at the edge of the field, watching. The label on the package said, "Deliver before the fire dies." Never went back. Told my boss it was a wild dog issue.